Welcome back, everybody. My name is Sucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about just how nonsensical the entire NBA Eastern Conference is. And I know that seems like a broad statement, but as I go through this team by team, you're going to understand what I mean. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy this type of content, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. Okay, so now that the trade deadline is over, we kind of know what each team in the NBA is about, and it's time to start truly evaluating where they stand in the hierarchy of the league as a whole. Sure, there's going to be some buyout guys here and there, and maybe some of those guys will end up helping a team, but for the most part, we know what each team is about. And as you start to look through the Eastern Conference in the NBA, it really starts to get not necessarily confusing, but in terms of matchups and which teams match up well against others and how good they are, and you know, trying to look through all the stats and figure out who's actually good and who's legit and who's not. This whole conference honestly just doesn't make any sense. As I said in the beginning, that's kind of a broad statement. So let me just go through this team by team, and maybe you'll start to understand what I'm talking about here. All right, first let's talk about the team with the best record in the Eastern Conference, the Milwaukee Bucks. They are by far the favorite to come out of the East, to represent the East in the finals. They've been the best team league-wide the entire season. They have a borderline historic point differential, by far the best in the league, and just overall seem like the best team. They have the likely MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo. They could potentially push for 70 wins. And again, people are just kind of assuming at this point this is the best team in the East. But if you start to nitpick a little bit, there are some things potentially wrong with this team. 3 of their 7 losses, I know how nitpicky that sounds, 3 of their 7 losses on the season are to teams near the top of the Eastern Conference in Philly, Miami, and Boston. And one of those was a loss on Christmas Day to Philly, in which they got absolutely destroyed from the three-point line. And that's the thing that worries me about this team, and I continue to say it. They give up the most three-point attempts as well as three-pointers made in the entire league. Now, their percentage is trending up. It used to be near the bottom. Now it's right around 18th. But still, a team that gives up this many made threes and attempted threes, that makes me nervous, because if there's a way to level the playing field against Milwaukee, it's to have a couple of big shooting games like Philadelphia did on Christmas Day. And when you get into a 7-game series with them, if the other team wins a couple of games simply because they outshot them, and that's mostly what they try and do, they try and pummel you inside with Giannis and he kicks it out to shooters. If that main advantage is taken away from them in such a smaller sample size of just a 7-game series as opposed to an 82-game season, that could be a huge issue. Again, I'm nitpicking, but still a problem in the back of my mind. And then they do still have the loss from the Eastern Conference Finals last year that's potentially still hanging over their heads. But this video really isn't about Milwaukee. Sure, there are some matchups in the East that really scare me for them, specifically Philadelphia, who I think is a matchup nightmare for really every single team, and that's kind of the core point of this video as we get to Philly later on. But overall, Milwaukee should be fine, could even get to those 70 wins like I talked about, but in the postseason, I think matchups as well as the three-point defense is going to be really important. All right, let's move on now to the Toronto Raptors. This is a team that I got some heat for not including in my contenders video that I did like a week and a half ago, talking about the flaws with each NBA contender. I didn't put them on there, and honestly, I'm going to stand by that. I understand that they have the second best record in the Eastern Conference, but still, let's talk through this a little bit. So as I said, second best record in the East, that core of Van Fleet, Siakam, and Lowry, plus a whole bunch of role player guys, is a really nice core. However, when you're looking at the record against some of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, it isn't great. They're 5-7 against those other quote-unquote top East teams this season. 1-2 against Boston, 2-1 against Indy, 0-1 against Milwaukee, 0-2 against Miami, and 2-1 against Philly. Now, to be fair, they haven't been fully healthy for some of those matchups, but that's the case for a lot of teams. And even if that's the case and the other team was fully healthy and they weren't, it's still definitely concerning overall when you're looking at that 12-game sample size and trying to say, hey, how good are they against the other teams in the East? This is definitely a concern. And I do want to give them credit, because when you watch them, it's very clear that they're a strong team. They're a cohesive unit. They know how to play the game the right way. They know, they're confident in themselves, right? Like, this is not a team that's unsure of themselves. Sometimes you'll watch Philadelphia and you're like, these guys don't know where to stand. They don't know what they are as a team. Toronto knows what they are as a team. But my main sticking point against them is I just don't know if the talent level is on the same level as some of the other top teams in the East. And even though their record is second best from a pure overall talent standpoint, I would put them 4th or maybe even 5th in the Eastern Conference in terms of the pure talent of their players. And I'm getting a little bit of 60-win Hawks vibes from this team. A couple years ago when Coach Bud led that Hawks team to 60 wins and then they struggled in the postseason, this just feels like a very overachieving regular season team to me. I understand that they have that confidence from winning the championship the year before. They've done a ton of things correctly to try and replace the production that Kawhi brings. But once we get to the postseason, do they have that true go-to guy? Is Van Fleet going to be able to continue to shoot the ball the way that he has all regular season? Because remember, early in last year's playoffs, he was not playing well at all, and then he picked it up as we got closer to the finals. I want to give them credit. I think they've played really well, but once we get into the postseason, I'm not sure they're going to be able to sustain that level of success. And now we get to another really interesting team in the Boston Celtics. They have the second best point differential in the entire league behind only Milwaukee, and they have a top 5 rating in both offense and defense, which typically is a really good indicator of a team that is playing well. As point differential, as well as having a top 5 rating in both offense and defense, very, very good indicators for not only the postseason, but as well as potentially for a finals or a championship. Now, the other thing that I really like about this team is that they have 3 guys that score 20 plus and 4 guys that score 17 plus in Kemba, Jalen, and holy cow, Jason, and then Gordon Hayward as well. Those are the 4 that score 17 plus, and then the first 3 score 20 plus. They have the versatility. They're not just relying on a couple of guys. They're relying on a really nice core 3 plus a couple of other guys as well in terms of their offense, and they have all the versatility in the world defensively, at least on the perimeter. The problems that I have with this team are the matchup, specifically their ability to defend some of the more dominant 5s in the league, especially someone like Joel Embiid if he is healthy in a Philadelphia series. And even a team like Indiana that has Sabonis and Turner, that could be a matchup issue for sure for Boston. And then the other issue that I have is just their lack of a go-to scorer potentially in the postseason. I don't know if Kemba Walker is that guy just because I haven't seen it at the NBA level. Not a guy with a ton of postseason experience considering how long he's been in the league. And those things are in the back of my mind for Boston. And this is another team similar to Toronto that feels a little bit overachieving to me. Now let's move on to the Miami Heat. And this is a team that I really like, and I like some of the moves that they made at the deadline, but I question if their ceiling is too low. Like, do they have a very limited ceiling in terms of what they could potentially be in a postseason series? They're 9th in the league in point differential, but the large reason why their record is so high right now is because they're absolutely destroying teams at home. They're 22-3 at home, and there's 2 different ways to look at that. One side is, well, they're taking care of business, they're winning the games that they're supposed to at home, and the other hand, they're taking advantage of the easier games at home to overinflate their record compared to how good they actually are. The other part of this is they're going to have to rely pretty significantly on youth once we get to the postseason, whether it's Duncan Robinson or Kendrick Nunn or Bam Adebayo or Tyler Hero. They obviously have guys like Jay Crowder, Andre Iguodala, Jimmy Butler, playoff proven guys, but still on the fringes, just like most teams in the East, they're going to be depending on younger guys. And again, maybe this is a bit of an overachieving type team. They weren't nearly this good last year. They brought in Jimmy Butler. Presumably, if they're healthy, they should be really good in the postseason, and I think that they will be, but there's still just a lot of question marks with them in terms of, are they really this good, or are they just winning a good amount of close games, judging by their point differential compared to most of the other teams that we've talked about to this point. And now we get to the Philadelphia 76ers, and this is honestly the core of the video. I know I'm getting to it, kind of late in the video, but this Sixers team is what screws everything up, because they are the most underachieving team in the entire NBA to this point, in my opinion. But the best version of Philadelphia, if they're playing at their peak, is probably the best team in the Eastern Conference. Now, arguably, you could say that Milwaukee, no matter what, is the best team, even if everybody is playing at 100%. Maybe you could make that argument, but if you're talking about from a pure matchup standpoint, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons and the size of this team is such a huge issue for teams in the Eastern Conference. And that is really what screws this all up, is because when you're thinking about the matchups in the Eastern Conference, teams like Milwaukee are going to play well against most of the other teams in the East, not including Philly. They're going to play well against Boston, against Toronto, against Miami, against Indiana. Philly is going to play well against most of those teams, and then maybe Toronto as well, depending on how well Gasol can actually defend him. I think that defend Embiid, and I think that the Sixers have a really good formula in terms of potentially slowing down Giannis Antetokounmpo with having all that size, and Al Horford and Joel Embiid, and obviously going back to that Christmas Day game, Giannis had one of his worst games of the year in that game because of the defense of Embiid and Horford and other guys. And they are the matchup that just screws this entire thing up. You can poke holes in pretty much every single resume of every single team in the East, including Milwaukee a little bit. You have to search for it a little bit because they've been so good, but pretty much every team does have some kind of significant flaw, and you can think of a reason why they might not end up doing very well in the postseason, or at least not as well as you would expect. But Philly is the wild card here, because if they're playing well, which there's no guarantee that they're ever going to find that ever again, that they're going to find the right combination of shooting and lineups, or if this group even works in the modern NBA, but if they can ever find that, they're going to screw up the entire postseason. And then on top of that, I'm also going to add this Indiana team in here that is just, they played so well without Oladipo, and now he's coming back and they have to integrate him. They have this constantly weird dynamic between Sabonis and Turner. Sabonis is now an all-star and Turner is starting to fade, and who are they going to pick in the long term? And then they've got the Brogdon Oladipo thing. They're so good, but also have so many question marks at the same time. And I think that is really the theme of this entire Eastern Conference for the season, and why I'm saying that it doesn't make any sense at all. I don't really think, other than just going with the canned answer of, yes, it's going to be Milwaukee going to the finals, I don't think you can really look at this conference and say with any kind of confidence, I think this team's going to make it, this team's going to make it, or this team is going to make it. Like I said, I can see Milwaukee being shot out of a series just because their three-point defense isn't quite there. I can see a team like Philadelphia figuring it out in the postseason and making the finals. I can see a team like Miami really playing well in the postseason behind a postseason-proven coach and Eric Spoelstra and a lot of playoff-proven veterans like Jimmy Butler and Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala. I could see them figuring it out. I could see Boston using their three-headed monster at center, Kemba going on a nice run, those younger guys boosting that team. I could see Toronto potentially making a run at this because they have that championship pedigree. There are just so many different combinations of matchups, and I think that's what it's going to depend on at the end of the day. Who's playing Philly and when they're playing them, who's playing Milwaukee and when they're playing them, and how well they're shooting. And maybe that's just how the NBA is now. You know, it depends so much on who's making shots and the matchups that you have, big versus small. Maybe that's just the way the league is now, but I think more than any other year, this Eastern Conference definitely shows that in terms of all the different combinations and how it honestly just doesn't make any sense. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.